David Cay Johnston. Look who it is. The superstar. Do you know that when you come on, you get the best ratings?
Well, I'm glad I can do that for you.
Well, the great thing is that people chase ratings, and so they chase the most provocative or divisive. You know how the algorithm works and what people click on. But you're actually a Pulitzer Prize winning investigative journalist, a professor, an author who's written so many of my favorite books. You are an expert's expert. So it's nice that you actually rate, that people actually, those two things don't usually necessarily go together. You know what I'm saying?
Well, would that we had more people, particularly in journalism, who were not limited to what their sources tell them, and they knew how to independently learn things, and they understood the deep, broad context of things. And it's just not the way it's ever been. And I've been at it almost 60 years, and it just doesn't change.
How much of your appeal do you think is sex appeal, David?
Yeah, right. Minus 25%.
Ratings just went down, sir.
Sorry, pal.
Let's get into it. There's so much to talk with you about. You're also a Trump expert, and you've written books about him. You know him. You covered him when you were in New York, and so on. But now, you know, another person who knows Trump maybe even better than you, I think, might be Vladimir Putin. How well does Putin know him? How well does he play him?
Well, Putin plays him extraordinarily well, and you saw this in Alaska. Trump walked off Air Force One, walked about 50 feet on the tarmac before he got to the red carpet. He then stood there waiting for Putin, where American soldiers got on their hands and knees to make sure that Putin only walked on a red carpet. It went right up to the ladder or the stairway to his plane. Trump then started applauding him like he's a fanboy. And then when you watched Trump walking, and the networks didn't show this footage, he walked zigzag back and forth. Yeah. Now I have a back injury from 54 years ago. So if you were behind me, you would say, gee, he walks a little odd. Trump's walk tells you that he both has physical and neurological problems with his inability to walk anything resembling a straight line. And then when their conversation was over, and thank goodness it was not alone, the original announcement was it would be Putin, Trump, and a translator, presumably Russian. Instead, he had Marco Rubio and Steve Witkoff and a few other people with him, so we have a record and other people who know what happened. But the host head of a country always speaks first after a meeting like this. Donald let Putin go first. And that just tells you how much Donald Trump is not the equal of him. There's also a video out there of Miss Legrand, the former head of the European Union's finance side, a very well-known banker, in which she's asked about Putin. And she points out, you go to a meeting with Putin, he doesn't have notes in front of him, but he's remembered everything. He knows all the details. He's thoroughly prepared. Yeah. And then they ask about Donald, and she has to resist the desire to just laugh out loud, because he's utterly and totally incompetent. He doesn't know anything. He doesn't do any prep. And he has this belief that he has magical powers, or as he was caught on a hot mic telling Emmanuel Macron, the French president, I think Putin wants to do this for me, end the war for me. What utter nonsense. What childish thinking, Pete.
Well, maybe the KGB agent did just that. Made him think that. I'm sure he said something, you know, I want to do this for you, are probably words or something similar that Putin said to Trump. And he ate it right up, yum, 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 so much that he then regurgitated it to another foreign leader.
Yeah, but that's the problem is Donald, when you're flattering him, and I've negotiated with Donald many, many times, and it's very simple. You figure out something he wants, you flatter him, and then you get everything you want and more. He's not a great negotiator. It's just a claim that he baldly and falsely makes. And Putin obviously knows, and he's had advice from experts in psychological manipulation, how to play Donald.
How significant was the meeting a few days later, a couple days ago, with all the European leaders? My friend Benny in the live chat says Trump met Putin halfway for his visit, and he made Zelensky and European leaders fly all the way to Washington. So it's clear who he prefers. He also loves people coming to him and kissing the ring. That's what this trade war, I think, is about. But how significant was that meeting and the behavior of all of them, knowing they had to be sycophants or supplicants, if you will, to get anything of what they wanted? I mean, even Zelensky, the humiliation he must endure to even have to address Donald Trump as Mr. President. I would say probably almost everybody feels that way. What do you think of that? All the European leaders come in, and what, if any, progress gets made with a guy who clearly just wants to take the country? I mean, it seems like all a charade. We know what Putin wants. Well,
to get that many leaders, France, Germany, Italy, the UK, and to move that quickly from Saturday morning in European time to be in the White House and ready to go to a meeting at basically midday is extraordinary.
Yeah.
Things like this normally are planned for a long period of time, which tells you how much these European leaders understand that Vladimir Putin, if he is not stopped, will just keep going. And the people who will be behind him when he dies, they will keep going. And so it was crucial. And I thought actually they must have had some staff level coordination ahead of time, because they knew how to play Donald. They knew how to flatter him. And they brought up a very sticky subject on which Putin will never move. And that's the kidnapping of children. Now, the claim around the table was 20,000 children. I don't know how many. The Russians have said 20,000 children. But that's an issue on which Putin is never going to hand back these children. It's not going to happen. And so I think this was terribly important to show Trump this case. And remember, on the trade wars that you brought up, they're really not trade wars. They're just Donald Trump attacks. He has no legal authority except in a very limited area to impose any tariffs where Congress has given it to him. These are illegal tariffs. But what does Donald say? He claims that, without naming them, world leaders have called him and said, "Oh, Mr. President, thank you for showing us the error of our way and letting us pay these tariffs." And of course, those countries don't pay the tariffs American consumers or businesses do.
Right.
So, what you were seeing was, people call it a coalition of the willing. I would call it a coalition of the competent, training the clown.
Yeah, what you said about we haven't seen anything like this, and we normally don't. There's usually a lot of planning. I think Macron was on vacation, like surfing in a lake or something. And I've heard other people basically say that we haven't seen this kind of circling of the wagons, foreign leaders meeting in this type of urgency since 9/11. So I think that's obviously a pretty accurate analysis of that, the giving people a sense of urgency. Let me ask you then about how important the issue of expertise normally would be in government, in negotiation, and how usually attention to detail is one of the pride points of people who work in government, in diplomacy, in economics. And, you've got this guy, Steve Witkoff, who's a real estate guy dealing with both Ukraine and Russia and Israeli Arab issue. And he's got people in every part of his government. Pete Hegseth is the Secretary of Defense. He's got very few people with expertise doing anything. And I feel like rather than getting the root of why that is, let's just agree that's what it is and that's where it is. How do you see the damage being done in any of these areas? The fact that you've got people that aren't even shouldn't be anywhere near these meetings, taking them, leading them.
When you see a normal meeting pre-Trump of, say, the US president and Xi, the dictator in Beijing, you'll notice there's a very long table with a big staff. And that's because the change of a verb or even a verb tense can be a signal of something. And so these are highly trained people, very super smart people. All the people who get past the first round to become a State Department diplomat, 97% don't make it. Only 3% make it. And that's after the first cut. And Donald has surrounded himself and appointed intentionally people who are either family members, complete sycophants, or utter incompetence, because he wants the government to fall apart, because then he enhances his power. That's the key to this. Now, Earlier this month, my wife and I, maybe out of a need for self-punishment, I don't know, we took a week of vacation and went to see civil rights sites in Mississippi and Alabama, and then we went to the Chautauqua Institution in Western New York, which I think of as Disneyland for intellectuals. And we spent a week taking classes on authoritarianism, fascism, and autocracy. And wonderfully pleasant mornings, which we softened with a lot of orchestral music and nice dinners on the patio of the hotel overlooking the lake.
Well, what did you learn?
And one of the courses I took was written by a retired Xerox executive about 7 fascist states in the 20th century. Spain, Portugal, Italy, the original fascist state, Germany, etc. And he came to some solidly supported conclusions, I realize now from doing some more reading, that every one of these fascist governments appointed either family members, criminal associates, or incompetents, exactly what Trump is doing. That all of them didn't provide the services and the goods that government needs to provide for the economy to work. Mussolini's trains did not run on time, contrary to that claim. And that they all petered out over time. Now, Franco managed to, close to 40 years in Spain, but the rest of them died out quicker than that. And so we need to keep that in mind. And we have enough people who are not poorly educated, as Donald likes to call his followers, people who should be able to see what's happening here. The destruction of our federal economic statistics operations, which they sort of tried to do, and I wrote a little bit about in the first Trump presidency, but they weren't competent to do it. That's going to drive big business absolutely crazy. I mean, how do you make decisions about how much capital expenditure are we going to do next year? Are we going to expand or contract this production line or this line of service? Are we going to hire a lot of people or not? Are we going to move operations so we focus on something in Texas rather than in Iowa? And you need this government data, which is highly reliable. You can argue about some of the ways, for example, that we measure prices, but you can't claim, as Trump does, that it's all rigged and against him. In fact, the record shows, if anything, it was rigged. You could make a better argument against Biden with the revisions at the end of his one-term presidency. So we may not get out of this. We may live under a dictatorship for the rest of our lives, but we still can get out of this so long as people don't become afraid. And that's why you're seeing the soldiers. Yeah. That's why you're seeing the masked goons there's video now of these guys saying things like, we can do anything we want.
Well,
they can, because Pam Bondi's not going to prosecute them. And then what is one last thing on this, Pete? Right now, there are military bases around the country that have been given instructions to get ready for DHS to arrive. They've been told they're going to get Connex boxes. That's the military version of a shipping container. You know, we ship all the goods around the world on ships. And a Connex box is full of armaments and ammunition. They've been told you're going to have to provide housing. You're not going to bivouac these people in tents. You're going to have to find some way to have housing for them, barracks presumably. And the bases that have been notified that I know about are near big cities whose mayors are not only Democrats, but they're either people of color or women or both. The first 2 cities Trump has gone after, LA and Washington, D.C., black women mayors. And then, of course, he just lies. You know, there's 4 times the murder rate in Jackson, Mississippi is 4 times the rate in Washington, D.C., for example.
Yeah, it's obvious what's going on there. By the way, NPR reports that deportees are currently being held in converted shipping containers, these Connex boxes, in Djibouti.
Yes.
I mean, these countries that have somehow agreed to take those people that we are deporting, even if they're not from those countries. It's crazy.
Well, and Pete, think about this. I have a daughter-in-law who lives in Canada. She's a Canadian citizen. She will not come to visit us in Rochester, New York, because there have been these examples of people from Canada, not a lot of them, but a handful. And instead of saying, we're not going to admit you, and you turn around and walk back across or drive your car back across, they hold them in horrible holding cells for days. This is unconscionable.
In terms of people being scared, I think it's important that people continue to, whenever possible, push back however they can in public. Everybody carries a camera in their pocket. And I just saw, before we came on air here, a video of J.D. Vance walking through Union Station. He's checking on the frontline troops at Amtrak, these National Guardsmen that are away from their families and their jobs, protecting people in Union Station, which I've been to hundreds of times and never had anything but an amazing experience because it's an awesome train station. Anyway, there's J.D. Vance walking through the station with Pete Hegseth and Stephen Miller, and some guy just starts yelling, "Hey, are you going to fuck a couch?" And over. Now that's gone viral. And the reason I bring it up is because I think that that's brave. Like, you can't do that in a country often where there's authoritarian rule. You can't do that in North Korea. You can't do that in Moscow. So it's important that people continue to speak out, whether people find that disrespectful or whatnot. We've never been in a situation or in an atmosphere where you could be concerned about being arrested. So I'm happy to see people on the streets everywhere and people taping them everywhere, doing any kind of protest movement that they can. What do you say?
As long as it's not violent. Donald wants there to be violent protests so that he can impose martial law. And that's been the dream of a lot of people. When Reagan was governor of California, I broke the story. This obviously goes way, way back in time, that the Reagan administration was teaching National Guardsmen and police officers in California how to impose martial rule. They were not teaching them how to return civilian rule, however. When I pointed this out in the story, so I was reporting it, they said, oh, that's an oversight. We'll fix that. Well, several years later, nope, they hadn't ever done that, because the far right's goal has long been to get rid of democracy. I mean, Mitt Romney told us this. Millions of members of my party, the Republicans, millions of members of my party don't believe in democracy.
Nowhere is that more true recently than the redistricting efforts started in Texas as a result of a request by Trump. That wasn't a Texas idea. That wasn't a Governor Abbott idea or a Republican in Texas movement or something that they campaigned on. So the redistricting efforts, which is kind of, people are talking about an arms race. If Texas does it, California does it. I think that's an apt analogy. I don't know what you think. But also now Trump, after talking to his best friend, says we shouldn't have mail-in voting, because Putin said we shouldn't have mail-in voting, even though he himself is won, arguably because of mail-in votes. As a result, he himself has voted through mail. There's no sign of it not being anything but massively efficient and helpful. So what do you make of those two efforts to destroy? Those are just recent efforts, and you can add anything you want to destroy our democracy, with Republicans either being silent or completely complicit.
All right. Well, the professor here is going to give you a little quiz.
How dare you?
What percentage of Texans who are registered to vote are Republicans?
I think it's like I feel like the number is like 30 to 60 or something.
37%. There are 2 million more registered Democrats than Republicans in Texas. So I don't understand, and I really hope you can find a guest who can explain, how did the Democrats keep losing in Texas?
I think by the way, I think the answer to that, at least in my district in New York 17 and other places I've learned, is that there's way more registered Democrats, but they're less likely and less motivated to actually vote. I think
that's my suspicion, that they're not turning out the vote. And so when the Democrats had unions, when 1973 was the peak for unions, 37% of private production workers and about 80% of workers benefited from that, because lots of employers would pay premium wages just to keep unions out with the work rules they didn't want. They knew how to organize and be with people. They're not very good at it anymore, not any good at it at all. And the trick here is to make sure people are registered to vote and then build up an organization to get people to actually cast ballots. And the difficulty with that is that a lot of the fundraising money is going to pay consultants who buy ads on TV, which, by the way, under law are at the highest rate. You ever check in a hotel and you paid $99 for the room, and you look at the back door and it says the maximum rate for this room is $512. Well, that's what they're doing. They're charging the $512, the consultants, because they get a slice of that pie.
Yeah.
And law requires it. But the Democrats can make a huge change. They can absolutely win the House, even with Texas doing what it's doing and assuming California voters reject this proposal they have to approve to allow redistricting. I actually think the Democrats should be able to take the Senate. They've got a better table in 2026 than they had in 2024. But it requires two things. One is you got to really build the case about Donald. You got to keep Epstein in the forefront of this, because Donald cannot survive irrefutable evidence that he is a child rapist, a repeat child rapist. That is just not survivable for any president. And secondly, you got to tell people, here's what the Democratic Party will do for you. We can't just attack Trump. You have to say, what are you going to do for me? You know, we're going to build a more robust economy. We're going to work to raise wages. We're going to raise the minimum wage. We're going to improve worker safety. We're a whole list of things. So,
yeah. Well, what do you think of Mamdani and his movement in New York and the Democratic Party's just really a lot of leadership in the Democratic Party terrified of him, and it just seems like a no-brainer at this point that the guy is. And people like him are the future. What do you think?
Well, look, the surveys and research data show that among people under 30, there's a great deal of rejection of democracy. This doesn't seem to be working. And you think about it, if you were born in 1995, the first thing you became aware of probably was 9/11 when you were in kindergarten or first grade. And It was terrifying. You didn't understand it, but it was terrifying. And then you get to where you've got some concrete reasoning in 2007, 8, 9, and the economy goes apart. And if your parents didn't lose their home, they certainly knew a lot of people around you who did. And in some measures, there have been articles by serious economists showing that by some measures, the 2008 collapse was worse than the 1929 to 1932 collapse. And some people have yet to recover from that. So, Pete, you got to persuade people that you'll be better off, but we got to get this guy out of the White House. And when we do, we're going to start doing things differently. And by the way, assuming we do not become a full-blown dictatorship, we're living right now under a dictator who's consolidating power. He doesn't have absolute power, but he's working to consolidate his power. If we get past this, then the next thing we have to do, because it won't be over, is we got to go into our Constitution and recognize that large parts of it are unenforceable. Trump right now is running an extortion racket. I was the person who first broke the story that he wasn't a billionaire, and he's never been a billionaire until now. He's a multi-billionaire because of all of these criminal schemes he's running and the foreign money and the other money that's flowing into his and his family's pockets. The courts take the position basically that nobody has any power to enforce it. He shouldn't hold office under the third section of the 14th Amendment because he gave aid and comfort to the people who attacked the Capitol on January 6th. What do the courts say about that? You don't have any standing to bring a case. So there's a lot of work to be done here, but don't lose heart, folks. On the other hand, don't give in. And if you're not brave enough to stand on the front of the line and yell at J.D. Vance, are you having carnal knowledge of a couch, then stand behind the people who are. Get out your cell phone and film the people who are. And if you have people who want to do something violent, like throw a tuna fish sandwich at an ICE officer, try and restrain them from that sort of thing, because it just helps Donald.
I don't know how I feel about throwing soft food at law enforcement. I'm okay. I'm not sure.
The food.
It depends. Was it tuna? It looked like a full sandwich. It seemed like a very white guy thing.
It's been reported as being tuna. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, then I think crossed the line. If it was turkey, I'd understand.
Given that it was wrapped up in paper, it wasn't even an oily smear job on the guy's uniform.
I mean, it was a full sandwich, David. Who does that? Like, at least eat some of it. That's a privileged thing to be able to do. Let me ask you about the reporting from David Kilpatrick in the New Yorker. Nobody's reported on Trump's finances and taxes more than you have. You've written books about it at this point. David Kilpatrick has a pretty big story at the New Yorker this month's issue. The number, how much is Trump pocketing off of the presidency? It's a long story, as they are in New Yorker. I'll give it the shortest version is like $3.4 billion he's added up, and that is conservative. Did you see the story? Do you think it's accurate?
Oh, I've read the story. I worked with David Kilpatrick. We were both business reporters at the New York Times 30 years ago. He is a brilliant, solid reporter. His coverage when he was Cairo bureau chief was spot on and has held up because he's really good and very, very, very well educated. And I thought his methodology and approach was absolutely solid as can be. The things I know about the most, I was very confident he knew what he had. And, this is the kind of thing that Trump wants to stop. And remember, Donald Trump has said, he said repeatedly in his first term, you shouldn't be allowed to write things about me that I don't approve of. That's how Stalinistic, how Maoist can you get? And now he's going to big companies like Intel and NVIDIA and saying, you're going to have to give us a stake. You're going to have to give us part of your revenues. You universities, you're going to have to pay hundreds of millions of dollars if you want to be in my good graces, which is just the first blackmail, not the last one, the first extortion. It's like the old mob deal. You want your front windows busted, Mr. Small Businessman with an ice cream store, or are you going to pay us? And we need to recognize that this guy, he's the third generation head of a 4-generation white collar crime family. And pieces like David D. Kirkpatrick's, long as they are, it was full of rich detail, wonderful examples. I think he did a great, great job.
So everybody should go read that because it's got the endorsement of the legend right here. You mentioned the NVIDIA and Intel situations. Most people are probably familiar, at least a little bit, with reporting around how he's extorted other companies to a certain extent to make certain moves, including Paramount and firing Stephen Colbert. But now, as well as you mentioned, the universities, he's extorting hundreds of millions of dollars from lawsuits, the law firms. But I guess I was kind of surprised to see these deals. They seem a little bit different. This crime, this pressure that the administration is putting on these two companies in particular, I'm sure more, but what is that about? How can the government, or what is he doing with NVIDIA and Intel? Is it a similar scheme, and is it legal?
Well, one scheme is we want 15% of the revenue from chips, microchips, we're going to allow you to sell in China. And you can't sell the very best cutting edge ones because they could be helpful to the People's Liberation Army, the PLA. The other one, Intel, is we'll buy a 10% stake in your company. Intel, which was the great giant gorilla in Silicon Valley, made a bad decision years ago. They did not want to create a chip for what became the iPhone, the first smartphones. And they've not done as well since then. But both of these are absolute control by the ruler. Where are the Republicans who would always complain? I mean, can you imagine what would have happened if any Democratic president had said, we want 15% of your revenues from selling this product, we're going to let you sell because we have the control and the power to not block you from selling it, or we want 10% of your company.
I have one example just of that, just thinking, I mean, there's hundreds, but during the Obama administration, Michelle Obama's campaign as first lady was to, eat healthier and exercise. And she just made remarks about making school lunches healthier and what could the government do about that, which is everything because they contract with the big farm companies.
Suppliers,
So her just saying that, they went crazy. Now, of course, the RFK Jr. is doing just that and way more, and they're applauding it. But I mean, that's just one that comes to mind. Michelle Obama saying, maybe school lunches could be healthier. We could do that as the government. It's in the public's interest. That was seen as government interference and communist and all that bullshit. This is actually government interference.
Oh, this is absolutely state authoritarian control. You can compare it to China if you want, where every enterprise the government has a large handle in, and no one is completely free of the government. Just don't lose sight of what they're doing more broadly here. Half of the growth in the American economy since World War II is due to taxpayer investments in basic science.
Right.
Why is some scientist getting a grant that for 15 years he's studying, the penis of some fly that's unusual from other flies? And then bingo, we suddenly get some medicine that cures a cancer. And the economy is full of these stories. And they are systematically destroying American leadership in science. Nobody in the world is anywhere near us in science. And this started with George W. Bush, where there were some scientists working on where they had to deal with embryos and they needed stem cells, and some of them left and went to China and especially India because they don't have the same, religious right nonsense that we have. And now we're shutting down these research projects. Trump administration is apparently planning to go ahead with destroying a $750 million satellite that will continue to work for another 10 or 20 years that measures transpiration. That is the amount of water that comes out through plants in the ground into the atmosphere, and helps us do a whole bunch of things, starting with weather forecasting. Well, why not just leave it there and let it do the work? No, we're going to destroy the thing. And they are out to do what Steve Bannon said, but on steroids. Bannon said 10 years ago, we're going to deconstruct the administrative state, which is fancy talk for we're going to burn down the federal government.
Right.
And that's what they're doing now. And we will all be poorer. More of us will die prematurely. More of us will get sick and will not be able to get therapeutics like mRNA vaccines that save lives. And all of this for the glory of this clown who doesn't know anything. I mean, a man so ignorant he didn't know what happened on December 7th, 1941 in Hawaii.
So good talking to you. Every question, every topic, nobody is better. And I am so happy that you joined me today. A real national treasure you are. What do you want to plug besides the Rochester Institute of Technology?
Thank you very much. I got to tell you, I'm starting my second year teaching full time. I've always taught half-time or quarter time, and it's terrific. And the quality of the students at RIT is just astonishing to me. They're really high quality, and they're upbeat. They recognize they're on the cutting edge of where the world is going. It's going to be more and more complicated. Science is going to be more and more important. And even though I teach in the College of Liberal Arts, I teach criminal justice, law, journalism, and soon public policy. Almost all my classes have some students who are on the technical side. And overall, it's very upbeat. It's in Syracuse, I found students a lot of them to be morose, where I taught at the law school for 15 years. Here, and I'm not a lawyer, I just teach law. But here, very upbeat and very glad to see that. And surprisingly apolitical.
Really?
Yeah, not like when I was in college, I was a reporter on the staff of the San Jose Mercury, and I could go to demonstrations, anti-war demonstrations in the late 60s. Whether it was a college or high school, I could just walk onto the campus when reporters were barred because I looked like another student. And students were highly political because we had a draft, and young men didn't want to get killed over this dumb war in Vietnam. We don't have a draft. So it doesn't motivate young people in the same way, but maybe some of these other issues, losing Pell Grants, foreign students not coming. And foreign students, by the way, they pay full freight. So people like me, we are major contributors to improve finances in America, because people who live in various countries around the world, they want to come. They don't get discounts, with rare exceptions for somebody who's a genius. They pay full freight, and that subsidizes our country. It subsidizes higher education in our country. But Trump, he wants to prevent these students from coming by and large.
We want to invite you to our gathering, the Stand Up with Pete Dominick listener gathering, September 5th through 7th in Syracuse on my friend's farm. Someone just thought of that. I'm like, yeah, David, and
send me an email. If I can come, I'll come.
He went to the Chautauqua, weekend with his wife. That sounds a lot more erudite.
That's further away.
We're gonna be playing cornhole. We're gonna be doing a dunk tank on me. I'm not sure how much more excited to be.
I can't miss the opportunity to try and dunk you.
Yes, yeah, that would be amazing. If we had video of you trying to dunk me and successfully dunking me, that would make my life. I would retire. That would be it. Thank you, sir. I appreciate you very, very much.
Pete, thank you for having me on, and don't lose heart.
Appreciate that a lot too. I won't, because you said it. All right, we're out, everybody. Thanks for joining us live. I'm going to hit end and say bye to David. Thanks so much for watching.